Hey Lindsay, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Yes, good, thank you. So today we're talking about anxiety.
Mm,
And anxiety, when I think about that, I think about the idea that, we have fear, which can be happening right now, and then we have something which is a little bit by an imagined fear, something that might happen in the future, which is really what we refer to more as anxiety. But there are different types of anxiety. So can you just talk a little bit more about like, you know, what kind of anxiety there might be, and then what are the kind of hallmarks or similarities between them?
yeah, I mean the sort of the psychiatric diagnostic labeling system sort of goes through a process of trying to break things down, and I guess the purpose of that is to get as clear as possible on what we think is going on, because that can inform treatment. But I think that we can talk in broad terms that, anxiety can be a more of a generalized type experience. It could be based on social type situations. So where that fear, where that concern that we're holding is linked primarily to how we're perceived by others, or how we're engaging in with people in the outside world, or what might happen in
Mm,
relational contexts outside the world. There can be people experiencing kind of a panic related, so where there's a very
mm,
strong panic attack response. um, I guess phobias would come under the heading of anxiety based problems, and those tend to be obviously quite specific. I don't think that needs a lot of explanation. I think most people
yeah.
know what phobias are. But also, we can have a fear of going outside, or of leaving a safe space. It can be focused on our health, that, we might be concerned that there is something physically wrong, or of concern in our bodies. And we talked last week about OCD. That's
Mm,
obviously comes under the banner of anxiety related problems. So it can be focused in lots of different orientations. But I like what you said about how what they often have in common, or what they all have in common, is this sense of a thought, or a sense of something is going to go wrong, or something is wrong, or the what
mm,
if type components to
mm,
our daily experience. And that can produce a really strong physiological response that I
mm.
think can be at the heart of a lot of the distress that's associated with feeling anxious. But I guess we would say feeling anxious in itself is not a problem. It's not a weakness. It's part of the normal human experience to have that. It's perhaps when the level of anxiety doesn't come down, or it's experienced with such rapid succession that it starts to take over our daily life, or our lived experience, in a way that stops us being able to feel like we have a sense of freedom, or able to enjoy life.
Yeah, and it's kind of we said last week that with OCD, it's kind of a learning kind of error that the brain makes. So it's learned that if I have a triggering thought, that this action of making, taking a step like a compulsion is going to make me feel more certain or better. And with anxiety, it's a kind of triggering thought, and this anxiety kind of increases. And then there's this avoidance behavior that we've learned that has come in. And it's like, well, okay, I just avoid it and it makes me feel safe. But somehow avoiding something, there's a temporary relief, but then the anxiety grows and gets even
Mhm.
stronger. And the brain kind of obediently increases anxiety around the same situation. So the cycle actually tightens. So again, it's this thing where we've learnt a particular mechanism, and then we get
Mm.
stuck in this kind of reinforcing cycle where this imagined terror just grows and grows and grows like a snowball kind of racing down a mountain or something. So I think it's interesting to see that what they have in common is this kind of cycle and this learning
Mm.
thing. Mm.
And I think anyone who is feeling as though the level of anxiety they experience is at a problematic level, or interferes with their daily life, we never intend for it to get to
No,
that point. And actually,
no.
how we end up there is this very logical sense of, this feels bad. Well, if
Mm.
that happens, that will be terrible. let's make that not happen, or let's make sure
Yeah.
that we protect ourselves from that situation. So the steps that we take to reduce the feelings of anxiety are often very logical to reduce the feelings
Yeah.
that are activated in our bodies, and feels almost like self-preservation often. And if the thought were to come true, then absolutely those would be steps of self-preservation. But I think what can happen, as you say, is we get looping, and sort of the thoughts of what we're worried might happen loom ever large, and we lose that context of that might be a possibility. So, working or supporting anyone who feels really anxious about something, it's really hard to just say, well, that won't happen, because often, because it's future oriented, we don't know for sure what will or won't happen.
Mm.
But we've lost that sense of that might be a possibility, but just because it's a possibility, it's perhaps not a probable outcome, and that there may be a range of other outcomes or explanations or possibilities, that if those were the things that we
Mm.
were more geared towards, it wouldn't produce such an anxious response. But the brain has kind of goes on its, on a bit of a wheel,
Yeah.
and it just picks up pace and gets faster and faster and more geared towards the similar path that it's used to going along, which I think makes the sort of just saying, well, don't worry about it, it's not likely, is usually not a very helpful thing to say to someone
Yeah.
when they're feeling really anxious about something.
And it's a kind of a loop that you're stuck in a type of anticipation we call catastrophizing. So it's like
Mhm.
often the very worst thing is going to happen. It's like, well, what if I fail at something? So, catastrophizing about your performance or worth, or what if they leave? So we're anticipating rejection or abandonment. What if I get sick? So we're hypervigilant about anything happening within the body. So every single pain or ache or something, it's like jump to that enormous kind of conclusion. What if I embarrass myself? There's that kind of social prediction kind of happening there. And I think with all of these, there's an attempt, these what if scenarios are attempting to help us feel safe. But because of that kind of slight avoidance thing that we do to sort of lessen this drive, it builds the imagined fear of this even bigger. It starts to create like its own feeding cycle in a way.
And I think what you said there about these are attempts to help ourselves, I think is absolutely true. Often if we were being very conscious about a health symptom, we're trying to avert that possibility, or catch it or detect it
For
early.
sure.
If we're worried about a performance issue or a social situation, at some level, there's part of us that is trying to manage the way in which we interact with others, or how do I get better at this thing that I've been trying to do. And often we can see that there are parts of us that are trying to be helpful in those scenarios, but it's when we get stuck in that loop, and the only thing that we can see, and we can almost live it, that the imagination is incredibly powerful, and we can imagine a scenario playing out, and it can almost feel as real to our bodies, to our physiology, as if that event had actually happened. So we can become overly focused on certain outcomes and less focus on other possible outcomes in a situation. But I think holding compassion for we at some level, we're trying to help ourselves. It's
Yeah.
just the path that it takes us down. Once
And
that gains traction, it snowballs.
And it has a kind of evolutionary component to it. I mean, like our brain actually evolved this way, back in the, Stone Age or whatever, our ancestors survived because they were worried about something. So, the rustle in the bush, well, it could actually be a tiger or a lion or something. So, the person that is kind of relaxed in that moment might not have survived. The person that was hypervigilant might have survived. So, so that kind of fight or flight mechanism that our brain developed at that point kept us alive. But today we face far fewer kind of physical threats, but that alarm system is still running in the same way. And if we look a little bit at what actually happens in the brain, that alarm system is called the amygdala. And this amygdala is, it detects threat, it activates that kind of fight, flight, or freeze response. It prioritizes speed over accuracy. So what's really important is the amygdala isn't trained on accuracy. It's not trained on, oh, I actually think that's probably not a tiger. It's just my cat that's like jumped out the window. It raises the alarm in the same way as if it was a tiger or a lion, because survival first and then reasoning comes second. So
Yeah.
it is designed that way. And the prefrontal cortex is also involved because it is the thinking part that is planning and reasoning and that kind of thing. And when this anxiety is kind of intensifying, the amygdala, it grows louder, but the prefrontal cortex is almost like quieter in a way because it goes, okay, I know it doesn't make sense, but I still feel terrified. So the alarm system actually cancels out like the prefrontal cortex's voice in a way. And it's like the two are, this one is going, it's a cat, and this one's like, no, it's a lion, and I am alarming everything because it's a lion. It's like, and I think that that it struggles, this one struggles to get some air.
Yeah.
And there's also other parts of the brain that are involved. So for example, when our fight or flight mechanism is actually in full swing, it activates the HPA axis and dumps out our adrenaline so we can get ready for that kind of survival, the speed and the fight or the flight. And the minute the adrenaline increases, our cortisol increases. And the minute your cortisol increases, it actually stops another part of the brain, which is the calm secretary called the hippocampus. It stops it like working properly. So then it's the one that would basically say, I think you should just calm down. Let's just listen to the prefrontal cortex for a second. And let's actually just evaluate first before we leap to this conclusion. This one just doesn't work properly. And that's why it can kind of like get heightened in a way. So our brain kind of just sort of takes over at this point.
And we need this as much as it can cause difficult. We still need this alarm system to kick in. If you're going to cross a road and suddenly become aware a car's speeding towards you, you don't need to think, is it a red car? Is it a blue car? What make of a? You just jump out the way. So that speed that you talk about, that survival instinct will override everything else in the brain because at that moment, responding quickly and survival is the priority. And it's why I think, most people can relate to a time that they've felt intense anxiety, some more than others, but, a job interview or having to stand up and give a presentation and the things that we can often experience. So, most people can think of a time perhaps where their mouth went really dry. And it's usually at a really inconvenient time because you might be trying to talk. But that's part of this fight or flight system that your body will start doing lots of things that you talked about, the adrenaline, the cortisol. It's priming your muscles ready to run away from something or fight something. That's our fight or flight response. But what you don't need to be doing is producing saliva. You don't need to be digesting food in your stomach. You don't need to be weighed down by a full bladder or bowels, which is why we may find we need to quite urgently feel like we need to go to the toilet because actually our body's just like, right, lighten everything that you don't need. So it has this really clever response that stops so many or impacts so many of our physiological systems. And so as clever as it is, it can also be hugely impairing. It's certainly something that can cause further anxiety. So I guess, just that example of still giving a presentation, if your mouth's gone dry and you find you're stumbling over your words and then you're blushing because you're embarrassed, but then you're really self-conscious that you've now gone red.
Exactly.
That it can almost become this self-perpetuating cycle. So as much as they're good for survival, many of the situations in which people in modern times experience anxiety, the fight or flight response almost makes things harder for us than helps us.
Yeah. And it's a whole body experience. I mean, like your whole body is involved. You've got a racing heart, shaking, dizziness, dry mouth, to your point, shortness of breath. Your chest can feel tight, nausea, sweating, muscles are all tense, and if you are worried about your body as well as that, the anxiety can trigger more anxiety, because it's, what the hell's that pain in my side? And what's that? So now we're kind of almost panicking about what we're experiencing in our body. But when our hormones and neurotransmitters are activated because of the initial, thought and that rush of adrenaline and cortisol in our body, with all this kind of happening, we are actually, already in a state in our body. So if we now jump to the conclusion that there's something now wrong with the body, and we're trying to attach meaning to that as well, we're attaching meaning to a system that has been activated because of that kind of thinking and the cycle that is kicked off in the first place.
It's a difficult loop to be stuck in, isn't it?
It is very, very tricky.
Yeah.
And the thing is, reassurance doesn't always help, because, there's that sense of, if I can just get certainty, I'll feel better. Or if I can just get the answer to what it is I'm hunting for, I'll feel better. If I can just, answer this or figure this out or know this for sure, then I will relax. And anxiety is not solving it, or getting to the other side of it is not actually about finding the answer to that question. It's actually tolerating that feeling of uncertainty and realizing I can feel uncertain and I didn't die. I am okay. Like, when I tolerate this uncertainty and I sort of just get to that place of it's going to be okay, funny enough, most times it is actually okay. It is most times a cat that's on the tin roof, or, it's not actually a lion or a tiger in the bush. And I think the worst case scenario, if we actually did experiments, we would see most times it doesn't actually happen. It's just imagined.
And that can still be so incredibly powerful. I heard of it's not so much an experiment as a mindfulness exercise, but you can talk through with someone and imagine cutting open a lemon, and you go through and describe this lemon and the juice and the scents and the smells in great detail, so someone really can sense this, what imagine this lemon. And then when you say, now imagine taking a bite, you can actually see the sort of that the face you pull when you eat something really sour. People, it has that physiological response as if you actually had bitten into a lemon. So it's absolutely the power of our ability to conjure up potential future outcomes are incredibly powerful, incredibly impactful. And if those happen to be things that reinforce a feeling of fear or of something going wrong or something bad happening, then that is absolutely a very difficult space to inhabit. And we talked a bit about, that when you said the fat panic and the feelings, if it goes as far as a panic attack, those can feel really scary. And really, as though, you might think something really bad is happening to your body, because it can feel incredibly intense. But actually, panic attacks aren't dangerous. They can just feel like something incredibly wrong is happening in the body. But it's how we learn to tolerate that and sit with it and work through it. Very, very easy, I guess, for us to say on a podcast.
Very easy, very easy to talk about in terms of the logic about it. But I think that's where the challenge comes with the way that it is being processed or treated, because a lot of the evidence-based treatments are very, very cognitive and very logical. And we might kind of go through a process, whether it be CBT or a space diagram or whatever the treatment is, but we go through this process and it's like, okay, logically I understand this anxiety doesn't make sense. I still feel it. And that's the part where we can almost feel shamed, or we can feel like there's something wrong with us, because despite all logic, I still feel this anxiety. And it's because your body doesn't feel safe. And the thing is finding a way for your body to feel safe and for you to tolerate this uncertainty. It's not logic. It's feeling safe. It's experiential. It's emotional. It's in the body. So it's a different kind of safety. It's that, like, being held as a baby, and it's like, oh, I can just melt here and everything's going to be all right. Whereas that sense of there's something wrong with me, that I'm not getting this, can be so invalidating.
And I think that point you make around how it's a full body experience,
Mm.
I think the same applies in what might be helpful for reducing anxiety is a full body experience. So we can, if we get it up here intellectually, but we don't feel it in our bodies, then it's going to have limited value. Now, absolutely, there's such a good evidence base for a lot of the cognitive approaches, and that can be part of the picture of understanding your cycles, or understanding what happens, or understanding the particular thoughts, how they arise, and getting to grips with that. But if it only stays from kind of a neck up intervention, then it's really going to limit our ability to start to physically feel safer. So there's something, as you say, around how we feel safety. We can't think our way to safety alone. We have to teach our body to be able to feel safer, and to be able to bring some of that activation down from our bodies.
Yeah. And I know you're big on parts therapy,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's a fantastic approach too. And sometimes what's helpful is that part that is racing like that, is to see it as a part and name it as a part of ourselves in a way, and to kind of interact with it like, this is not actually all of me, because it
Mm-hmm.
actually isn't all of you. You're still here, your blood is still pumping, you're still breathing, you're able to still
Mm-hmm.
do something, but there's this other part that's really big right now, that's running this. And I think when we can sort of separate slightly, we can sometimes gain that perspective in a way. And even compassion is really important, because
For sure.
if you're now feeling anxiety, but now you're also beating yourself up for the fact that it's not logical, this is a double bind, because now you got to deal with the beating yourself up, and you're trying to learn like a new approach at the same time. That just sucks. So definitely compassion is super important, so that you're not
Yeah.
kicking yourself as you're down. Yeah.
And I find that connecting with how to be more compassionate around our experience of something like anxiety is in the parts where really starting to get curious around, what is this part that's feeling this anxiety, was thinking this way. What is it trying to do for me? How is it trying to
Yeah.
help? And I think when we can, if what we're feeling particularly anxious about is how we're perceived in social situations, well, maybe that's about that we're trying to connect with people, or we're trying to establish friendships or relationships, get on at work. And actually, when we can connect to why it's trying, what it's trying to achieve for us, I think that can automatically help us be more compassionate to, even though the mechanism might have some real downsides for us at the moment, it's trying to help us. And then I think we can open up other ways that perhaps we can work towards that goal. So often the values-based work can be so important, because managing or reducing anxiety protective behaviors. So if what we try and avoid or stay away from, or ways in which we try and reduce the anxiety we're experiencing almost by putting something manual in place, when we actually start trying to not do those things, our anxiety increases, because actually we're not doing the things that have numbed that down or tried to bring that down a little bit. So what can really help is reconnecting to, yes, this might be hard, and what I'm trying to work towards is, or why this matters to me is, so that we can really dig deep and find that actually, although this might be difficult, to stop doing some of the avoidance mechanisms that we've used previously, is because we have a bigger goal in mind, or something
Yeah.
important to us. And I think that can really help sit with it. But certainly,
Yeah.
yeah, when I've worked with people, anxiety often increases. Even though in my head as a clinician, I would see we're making progress, it actually might be that the person is experiencing more anxiety as they start to lean into their experience, before they get the benefit of, okay, actually, I didn't do that behavior, and actually it was okay. So before you've generated enough evidence that you can start to feel a bit safer and start to approach things in a different way, it can be, yeah, it can be a fairly rough ride, actually.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's the thing with with all interventions in a way, sometimes there's a mechanism that we've created that keeps us safe. As long as you keep avoiding, like you'll not feel that terrible anxiety with OCD. As long as you perform the compulsion, you won't feel this feeling of uncertainty. And every mechanism has like a mechanism that we can just like calm the farm in a way. But by performing this, it keeps everything in place. So when we are intervening, we're actually challenging the performance of this thing you've learned. You're not going to like that. Your body is going to be like, what are we doing? Why are you dismantling something that's working? And it's like, but dude, it's not working. Like you're actually a bit stuck and this sucks. So
short term, it might
short
feel
term.
like it does something helpful, but long term, no.
Yeah. So it's like seeing the long-term harm of it and actually going, all right, I'm actually ready. So being that kind of ready to dismantle. Sometimes it can be a little bit of a rocky period, but the overall goal is to kind of dismantle the things that you can have a more peaceful, harmonious life.
I really like in compassion focused therapy, there's this distinction between safety and safeness. So safety being the experience that we might feel safer because we've put something in place. So there's been an action or a avoidance that makes it feel safer, but we're not actually free from the feeling of fear. We've just put a barrier in place that helps us feel a bit more protected. Whereas safeness is that sense of that actual the freedom and the shoulders dropping down and genuinely feeling at peace and safe enough with a situation, and not just because we've done something that helps mitigate the unpleasant feelings. So I think that distinction between I feel safer because I've done something that helps reduce it, or I feel safer because I am safe. And I think that's can be a very different way of experiencing a situation.
Yeah. Okay. So some of those treatments, obviously the evidence-based ones are quite cognitive. We're talking about compassion-focused therapy. We talked about parts therapy. What are kind of some of the other things that people can look at or do?
Well, we've talked a lot about the body, haven't we? And I think that, that yes, there can be some really helpful cognitive approaches, but also I think that how do we teach our body? How does our body feel when it is settled and safe?
Safeness.
And calm and connected.
Yes.
The safeness.
Yeah.
So thinking about the different body-based strategies that people can find helpful. And I don't know about you, but I find of all of the range of different body-based approaches that are out there, people often find they really lean into some and like some and not others. And then other people, it's a different combination of things that they find works for them. So I guess if we think through some, breathing strategies, often people, and there's such a wealth of access now to guided breathing exercises online, thinking about grounding exercises through the senses, which I find can be really helpful if we're in that place of our body feeling quite activated and we're trying to just center it down. Movement, just thinking about movement more generally, sleep, water, food, thinking about all the ways in which we're looking after ourselves. I don't know, what are some of the others that come up for you?
Well, I think there's, that's things that people can do with themselves. I think mindfulness is probably better than meditation. I think meditation can sometimes spin people out even more. Whereas I think mindfulness has a very particular type of focus, so another self approach. But therapeutic interventions, there's a whole range of kind of body therapies, somatic experiencing, somatic sensory motor type therapies like Hakomi, or in certain ways IFS parts therapy kind of work, where it's like, how do we get the body to actually feel safeness in the now? But I think equally psychotherapy type approaches, which is relational safety. So feeling safe in a relationship with someone where maybe I don't know what that feels like. But I think at the end of the day, whatever the approach is, it must work for the individual. Like, it's some people love the cognitive approaches because they are quite logical people, but some people, logic doesn't make them calm down. Knowing that they should calm down doesn't make them calm down. I mean, so, my husband once said to me, it's like, you should just calm down. He said, when in the history of telling me to calm down have I actually calmed down? He's like, yeah, okay, yes, logic hasn't worked there. So, and for me, I feel anxiety often. I think I'm quite an anxious person, and in some ways, I've seen it as like a teacher. It's something that has been very helpful for me, that if I feel anxious in a situation, I now look at it like a part and sort of go, okay, you're unsettled about something. Let me actually just double check something in the situation that I'm in. Am I actually about to walk into a deal that I shouldn't be walking into? Or is there actually something that I don't feel settled with this person? Is there more going on? So it makes me investigate something a little bit further. And many times it's actually been right. There's been a little bit of an instinct that something wasn't quite right. And then I do that double check, and then it's like, and I'm like, thanks, friend. That was useful. But instead of feeling the whole thing and then trying to avoid the thing, I now work with it in a way. It's kind of like, okay, you are my friend. You're here to tell me something or teach me something. And that kind of alliance has made it very valuable to support me in making better decisions, in evaluating relationships or certain senses I have about things. So in some ways, it can be a very powerful ally.
And in that way, I think we've almost gone full circle to the beginning when we're saying, anxiety is not a weakness. It's essential, and it's absolutely part of the repertoire of human experiences. We would not last very long if we had no alarm system, if we had no anxiety. I think it's what we do with it and the relationship that we have with it that is so helpful. And that lovely example you gave also spoke to me about, and I don't think we named it yet, how often we have a sense or a felt experience of feeling anxious before we've really clocked what the thought is connected to it. So sometimes the thought may be very present and very clear to us, but sometimes we might actually notice the feeling, the uneasiness that starts to come with that building anxiety before we've really clocked what is that about? What am I picking up on that's making me feel uncomfortable? And so that curiosity to lean into and use it as information. What is it that I'm picking up on that would be helpful for me to become a bit more consciously aware of? That feels like a very different relationship with an anxious part than when the anxious part is kind of in the driving seat and is in charge of everything and the direction of travel. That feels like, it's part and parcel of our system, but it doesn't have to be in charge.
Yeah. And I will also share that in my own sort of therapy, when I started working with my anxiety, it got worse for a little bit because I had to dismantle that avoidance system, and, I just want to be kind of reassuring in a way that was a temporary, like, it wasn't like, oh my God, we've dismantled the avoidance system. It's all going to go really badly now. No, I felt more feelings in my body. I felt more anxiety. But then it was almost like I started to kind of realize, okay, I'm feeling this feeling. And I'm actually still okay. Like, I can actually feel this feeling and tolerate this feeling a little bit. And now I can sort of turn around and go, okay, well, why are you here? Like, what is it that you're trying to tell me about what is happening? And that was gold. And then when that started happening, now when I start to get this feeling, I'm immediately turn to my friend and go, oi, what are you trying to tell me about the situation? And I think that has made it that ally, and I think that is what's possible for anybody that goes to work on the anxiety, is that tolerating that initial kind of uncertainty, and then you can get that safeness again in your body.
And I think that's really talking to the different, I guess, stages at which we may have a relationship with the parts of us that are feeling anxious, or the types of situations that we notice produce more anxiety type feelings in us. And it might be that initially we just need to find coping ways of coping in the situations with the anxiety we experience. Then there might be some exploration, some reconnecting, and either some values-based work or parts work. And interestingly, the parts work, we often don't focus so much on grounding and reducing the intense feelings of, in this case, maybe it's anxiety, because actually we're trying to understand, what is that? What is that trying to tell us? What does it want us to know? What job is it trying to do? And what is it scared of would happen if it wasn't doing that job? But I guess that's very much kind of done in tandem with someone that can help scaffold that process and that exploration often. And so it might be how we kind of then go through different phases to get to the point where we can self-direct and start to use those feelings and as responses and as information in a different way. So I guess people listening might be at quite different stages in terms of how processed they feel with this stuff, or how raw it feels. And stuff. And I guess, as you shared, I have experienced one full-on panic attack once. And so I'd done something, I'd faced a fear, I'd gone caving, and I was really proud of myself, found it really hard. And about 6 hours later, when I was in a restaurant, overcome with the strongest, most terrifying feeling, and we'd ordered food, and I could do nothing but stand up and run out of the restaurant. And I just ran and ran and ran. It was all encompassing. So when I say it feels very intense, that comes very much from a lived experience of. And if someone had said, just calm down and just breathe, I think I might have thrown something at them. At that point, I was so adrenaline fueled. What I needed to do for me in that moment was to get some of that adrenaline and cortisol out of my body through movements. And that was what was helpful for me at that time. So this is absolutely, yeah, people might be experiencing anxiety to a greater or lesser degree, or in different types of contexts. But I think whatever a person's experience is, there is almost a menu of choices of things that can be helpful so that we can find a bit more freedom from it.
Yeah, and I too have had I had several panic attacks in my sort of early 20s, and it is horrifically terrifying having one. But again, I think I had the experience, one of my panic attacks, I managed to get myself to a place of like enough breathing, proper breathing, to sort of, a part of me was observing, well, what was actually happening as this was going on. And I could tell that the amount of adrenaline and cortisol that was in my body had just surged to a point. It needed to shake it out. It needed to get it out. And I kind of just started talking to myself in a way. It's like, it's okay, just shake it out. Yeah, just get it shaken out and all that stuff. And ever since then, and that really, really calmed it down. And then it disappeared in a way. And there was almost like, because I'd almost clocked or gotten, oh, this is what's actually happening within my body. It's okay. It's got too much stuff in it, and it just needs to get it out. In the same way, like, in Discovery Channel, you can see an animal that escapes the crocodile, and then it stands in a bush and it's got to shake a little bit. It's like all that surge of stuff in its body, it's getting rid of it. And much later, I think it was a few years ago, I had another situation where I felt like I was about to have a panic attack. And then I actually did a little bit what you did. I just sort of started running around a little bit, and it also went away, because when that surge comes, it needs that kind of movement in a way, because it's designed in the amygdala is designed to basically create this alarm, and then we need to fight or flee or do something with it. And if you're just sitting there, of course it's too much. Yeah.
And I guess it's thinking about how, if this is the type of thing that you experience, where in settings where it's not very easy or not very private, or not,
middle of a boardroom.
How can you go somewhere and kind of, or even just
shake it out,
shaking out, a bathroom stall, or wherever it may be. Even often we didn't talk about it earlier, but often when we feel quite anxious, we can get the leg jittering, shaking,
Yes.
even a kind of a movement like that. So just to help process
And to go
some
with
of
it.
these, some of these chemicals in the body, and and the other work as well. I guess just starting to think about how can we find other ways of navigating, because we need to, as you said in the earlier part of this podcast, the alarm, the amygdala is loud, is speaking more loudly than any other brain system. The prefrontal cortex is quietened down. We need to be able to sort of rebalance things a little bit so that we can access more of our rational mind, and then help further to settle ourselves and to bring us back into some sort of equilibrium. But yeah,
and that's where getting the hippocampus back online helps give some voice. It's almost like you've got a cheerleader that can go, hey, prefrontal cortex, time to come back online now, like I'm in charge. And there's this hysterical secretary, the amygdala, running around like, it's like, so you need the hippocampus back online. And sometimes that is about reducing the cortisol. So it's sometimes doing kind of a big movement or running up and down a hill. That's what I did. Like I ran up and down this hill, and then afterwards I was like, okay, I'm okay. Everything's okay. So I think it is very terrifying in the moment, though. I really want to validate that, and I've experienced it myself, through panic attacks, but also through managing my own anxiety. And that loving of yourself is really key, and loving of all these parts that are participating in all of this is really key, because shame doesn't help with the relearning of a new system. It's kind of just like, okay, I'm just wired this way. It's all right. Yeah. Cool. All right. So on that note, we'll end there, and till next time, when we will continue discussing and musing all things health, trauma, and relationships. Take care. The information shared on the Naked Insights podcast is for educational and information purposes only, and is not intended as a substitute for professional therapy or counseling. While we aim to provide helpful and accurate insights, individual experiences may vary. If you're experiencing trauma, mental health issues, or distress, please seek guidance from a qualified professional. The views expressed by us as the hosts are our own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions or positions of any affiliated organizations.